Hey everyone, it's Horror Free for All, and hope everybody's having a great day so far today. This review is going to be kind of unorthodox for me, but I wanted to kind of chime in while my boys are doing a marathon of the Friday the 13th franchise. My buddies Strange Michael and Stranger Grayson are currently buddy reviewing these movies, and I wanted to kind of chime in and talk about my personal favorite of the whole franchise. Really, there's only two movies I actually genuinely care about from the Friday the 13th franchise, and this is one of them. I think this one would be my personal favorite. As you can see with the thumbnail, I also have collectibles here that I've picked up over the years to kind of enshrine one of my favorite slasher villains in movie history. I got the Hot Topic exclusive Funko here that's supposed to look like Part 5 New Beginnings Killer. And also, I have the NECA box figure that also has the Blue Mask Killer. I don't want to spoil who the killer is in case you haven't seen the movie. But the movie in question, of course, is Part 5 A New Beginning. Now, this movie, historically, has gotten so much hate from the Friday the 13th fan base. And I'm going to be upfront. I'm not a Friday the 13th fan. I'm not a Jason Voorhees fan. As a matter of fact, I'm very specific on what I like within the franchise. I think these two movies here are pretty much the only two movies I genuinely care about, and I will make a review of Part 6 following this video at some point, because these two are the special ones to me. Now, Part 5, I think recently got brought to light because Halloween Ends released, and I think Strange Michael made a poignant in his review about that film and how people were using Friday Part 5 as an excuse to slander Halloween Ends. And that's to be fair. I think Halloween Ends is the modern equivalent, at least in the slasher genre, of what Friday Part 5 did to Friday the 13th fans back in the 80s. And I think that's a very fair comparison. And as much as I'm mixed on Halloween Ends, I do think that it's better than a lot of the, well, I want to say a lot, but a good portion of films in the franchise. So it's not really a knock to that film, to, in my opinion, to compare it to this. Now, in the Friday the 13th fandom, normally, I would say normally for most fans, this movie will be in the bottom 5 somewhere. And a lot of people really hate this movie because diehard fans say that they think the franchise probably should have ended after Part 4, and in a lot of ways they're not wrong. I mean, it was marketed like the final film. Hell, they even had Tom Savini, who was the original makeup artist for the first film, come back to kind of send off Jason Voorhees as a character. But money talks, and Paramount was pumping these movies out in the 80s like they were fucking candy, okay? And they wanted to kind of shake it up. They wanted to keep the Tommy Jarvis character, which got popularized by Corey Feldman in Part 4. And they want to carry his character over and potentially do something new with the character. And I watched the making of this film because it's my favorite one in the franchise. And when they recruited Danny Steinman, who, by the way, used to be a porno director, to do this movie, the writers, I think, had a clean slate, and they mentioned something like they didn't know where they wanted to go, but they had a direction, and the initial idea was to kind of throw out and tease to the audience, but without making a movie surrounding it, that, let's just say, they had Tommy Jarvis in mind to be touted as a potential killer for future installments. Now, based on the audience reaction to this movie, they had a course correct with Jason Lives, and we all know what came after that. But I think Jason Lives is a good testament on course correction. It's almost like how Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, was a course correction for Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. And in a lot of ways, even though this movie is the middle of the Tommy Jarvis trilogy of sorts, it's almost like a standalone. within the Friday the 13th franchise in a lot of regards, because it does away with the typical we know it's Jason formula. It goes back to the first movie, which is more rooted in the whodunit aspect. Now, this movie came out in 1985. Trust me, Friday the 13th set up the whodunit formula, and so many slashers in the early 80s replicated this. And I feel like, in a lot of ways, I agree with some fans that Friday the 13th going back to basics, going back to this whodunit formula is kind of retroactive for the franchise. But I don't hold it against this film. I think this film is just so engaging. It's just so memorable, so fun. It knows what it is. It's a very sleazy film. Quite arguably in the top 5 sleaziest slashers ever made. Maybe not all time, but definitely in the 80s, I would say. I think as time went on, and as direct-to-video movies in the 90s and 2000s ramped up, I've seen some sleazier Wrong Turn sequels. I think My Bloody Valentine in a lot of ways is sleazier than this. But this is still an acquired taste movie that I know is not for everyone, but for me not being a Friday the 13th fan, I really enjoy this film. Okay, so let's get into the plot synopsis in case you haven't seen this movie, just so you know what to expect. Now, off the get-go, you get introduced to Corey Feldman, who I think was in between filming The Goonies or something, and he kind of came back to film this beginning portion of the film, where there is a sequence of events that kind of bridge the gap between part 4 and what would become part 5, where he's a child and it's raining outside and he's trying to go observe the burial of Jason, and he sees something that alarms him. It might be a dream, we don't know yet, but there seems to be something going on with that. And when it cuts to present, when you realize it's all a dream, he's waking up in the back of this I guess, Corvair car that's taking him to some unknown location. And it cuts to the credits. And once it leaves the credits, you realize that Tommy's being taken to a troubled youth home that's in I guess, a nearby area to Crystal Lake. I don't know if it's set on Crystal Lake. I think it's one of the few movies that's actually not set at the camp, which is kind of refreshing after so many movies. Where it's not specifically there. But it's out in the country because next to this youth center is this redneck farm of sorts where this crazy eccentric lady and her son live. And these kids have constantly caused trouble with this lady and their son. And there's a couple of characters in there that sneak off and go into her property and stuff. And that drama's there in the beginning of the film. And Tommy, his caretakers are given backstory behind him and why he's so troubled. And people know that he interacted with Jason Voorhees and potentially was involved with killing him. Now, it seems that Tommy might be holding on to some feelings he had from the previous movie. And there's a significant time jump. When he was in part 4, Tommy was probably 8 or 9, but in this film, he's like 15 or something like that. Well, you get the sense that he's been carrying this for years. Let's just say that. Well, as this plot kicks on, Tommy ends up meeting Reggie the Reckless, who's like this little kid whose grandfather is like a caretaker for this home of sorts. And they bond over Tommy's love of making masks that was prevalent in the previous film, and it's kind of touching there. You get to meet some side characters, and let's just say, one of the biggest things people bring up is the inciting event of this whole movie, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, it's literally over a goddamn candy bar, and a psychotic dude that's in this home. Well, this one kid, he is trying, I don't know if he's on the spectrum, maybe like the autism spectrum, but that's what it's kind of alluding to, which isn't trying to take anything away from the character, but I think that he's not, he's not depicted as somebody that's non-spectrum. Let's just say it like that. And he's trying to be nice and give people candy bars. He ends up making a mess and disrupting a few girls in the home. And he ends up going over to this guy who's chopping up wood, and he ends up messing with him. The guy's like a short-tempered guy, and he just loses his shit and just axes this dude to death. And what ends up happening is after this kid gets mauled to death by this kid at the home, these paramedics come, and you meet these paramedics, and there's some weird things going on. It seems like the police are mortified that this happened, and the neighbors and everybody's upset that some psychotic kid next door, killed somebody. So now everybody's on high alert, and if the nearby town wasn't already wary about this home of kids, they sure are now. Well, moving on from this point, the movie just kind of builds on Tommy's escalation. He gets really angry as that killing seemed to kind of trigger these visions of Jason that he sees throughout the film. And there's a scene where he beats up a fellow guy that's living at the home. And of course, in typical Friday the 13th fashion, there's people that start just dropping dead. But what's different about this film is that it's not just people at the campground. It seems like different locations. Like there's people getting killed that are stranded on a dirt road. There's a couple that's killed at a diner with a guy snorting cocaine. And supposedly, from what I've heard, that was actually real drugs they used on the set. This feeds into the sleaziness. And not to mention, there's multiple women in this movie that just bare-breasted. There's one woman in here named Deborah Voorhees. She's quite known in the Friday the 13th fandom because she made a film recently called 13 Fanboy. She directed it and all that. But she has an iconic role in this film, let's just say. And she is absolutely breathtaking. Deborah Voorhees, oh yeah. But this film does have that sleazy factor that carries through with all these kills and such. And of course, it eventually trickles down into kids that live at the home. And there's like this whodunit aspect because it's revealed at one point the cops are trying to investigate who's doing these killings and they think it's Jason Voorhees. But they're like, it's impossible, he's dead. So on one hand, you think it could be Jason Voorhees, but on the other hand, you think it could be potentially some of the characters that we've met in the movie. Some are more obvious than others, but there's plenty of suspects going on there. And eventually the redneck neighbors die and all that. And it comes to the climax where there's just a big old slaughter of pretty much the entire cast, down to about 3 people left. Tommy's one, Reggie the Reckless, and then this woman that I think was like the girlfriend or spouse of the man who ran the place is alive. And they have to deal with the killer at the end, who's donning the hockey mask. The blue hockey mask, I should say, that's exclusive to this film. And they realize who the killer is, and the ending gets recontextualized. Let's just, mild spoiler alert, it's not Jason, and you figure out who the killer is, the motives and all that. And then there's sequel bait involving Tommy Jarvis, and I'll leave it at that. And that's essentially what you're expecting to get out of Friday the 13th Part 5. Now, with this film, I really don't have much negatives with it, but if I had any, some people might view these as nitpicks or mild criticisms, but I think I do have 2 solid points of criticisms I have about this film. The one solid criticism I have is how they treat Tommy Jarvis in this film. Now, nothing against the actor who plays Tommy here. I think he was given a good, a decent hand here. He was given a role where he can act with more facial expressions and raw emotions than actual dialogue here. But I feel like they did Tommy an injustice here, especially given what we got in Part 4 from him and Part 6 later on. And I think Part 6 Tommy's my favorite Tommy. Here, he is definitely the weakest of the Tommy Jarvis trilogy. I think they didn't really know what direction they wanted to take with his character, and it's evidently shown. I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunity here to make his character pop a little more. I wish that we were given a little more dialogue with him, and we can see him interacting with more characters and just being quiet and just cut off. It's realistic. You know, this movie has this subtext of trauma with his character that he has to deal with, and I feel like the next movie has him overcoming trauma. And I feel like a lot of people's criticism, if it wasn't about this movie having a lack of Jason Voorhees, it's definitely the Tommy Jarvis criticism. I feel like the movie after this kind of corrects Tommy, and that was more of a knee-jerk reaction to this. But it's an issue here for me personally, unfortunately, and it might come off as a nitpick to some, but I find it as an issue. And the second thing is the ending to it. I get they were trying to throw that out there to see if it stuck with the fans. At the time when this movie was made, films were, especially in the horror franchise, you know, big ones at least, they were experimenting to see what stuck with fans. They were going off audience reactions. And supposedly, people hated the ending to this movie so much, they went into the script they had for part 6 and completely rewrote it into Jason Lives. Just because of the ending alone. And that should tell you a lot about the ending. The ending is very confusing. It kind of recontextualizes not only the facet of Jason Voorhees potentially being in the movie, but it makes Jason almost feel like he's a spirit or like a ghost. And that's as far as I'll go with that. And it's very confusing. Like, is Jason possessing Tommy? Like, what's going on here? Mild spoilers, but you'll see what I'm talking about if you watch the movie. But just know that the ending isn't the greatest thing, and it is a deterrent. But everything else about this movie, I think, excels, and it excels at it because it knows what it is. Off the bat, the positives to this movie is pretty much the kill count to it. I think at this point in slasher history, this probably had one of the highest kill counts ever by 1985 for slasher movies. There was approximately 15 plus deaths in this movie, I think, in total. If you count up all the people that died in here. And I have to say, some of the characters that die in here have memorable deaths in this franchise alone, but in slasher movie history. Reggie's older brother, prime example. His character dies in a fucking outhouse. And the way he dies, in my opinion, and in a lot of fans' opinions, even about Friday the 13th, just exclusively, think that kill is one of the best kills in the whole franchise. Now, part of the problem with Part 5, and I think it's been a problem since at least Part 4, is that the MPAA was trying to mildly censor the movies around this time, and you can kind of see the quality of the kills drop because Tom Savini's not doing the makeup effects here, and I don't really know the person who did them here, excuse my ignorance. I didn't really catch their name. You can definitely tell the drop in quality, but I do think that it's still the same mild problem as Part 4, but you still see the kills on screen for the most part. And some of the camera angles were used smart to kind of avoid MPAA obstruction to begin with. Like, there's some really cool kills involving a roadside flare that you kind of see mildly on screen. You see somebody get an axe to the top of the head. You see somebody get shears to the eyes, a belt wrapped around somebody's eye sockets, and you see it for a brief second. Kind of like how Part 4's kills were. You just see the kills for a split second, but you see this belt just protruding into this guy's face. You see a decapitation. You see a couple of gnarly kills. Impalements, throats being slit. I mean, you name it. There's some more creative kills in the franchise up to this point. And a lot of the kills' creativeness, I think, inspired some more creative kills that we get later on in the franchise. And I think Part 7, even, I read up, they were trying to outdo Part 5 and Part 6 as kills. And they did it to the point where MPAA made them completely strip the kills out of the movie, and that's famously known. But man, Part 5 really upped the ante when it came to the body count and the creativity of the kills. And that's pretty much what I come to Friday the 13th the most for the franchise, is the kills. And I think this one offers some of the best in the whole franchise, in my opinion. Not to mention that the character dynamics in this film really shine. There's a lot of memorable kill filler in this movie, to say the least, like Deborah Voorhees and her character. She has this boyfriend. They're like trying to constantly have sex. They have one of the sleaziest scenes in the whole franchise, but it's magnificent. Let's just say that. You have the girl that does the weird robotics dance with the weird hair. She has a memorable character because of how she acts. Reggie the Reckless is a memorable character. You know, the little kid with the red jumpsuit. He's fun. And his older brother. I mean, his older brother, man, it's one of the best characters in the whole franchise, hands down. And they all just have distinct personalities, even down to the redneck characters. I think a lot of people have a love or hate relationship with the rednecks. I think the mom recently passed away. I forget her name, but that's unfortunate. But those characters are even memorable. They have some funny ass fucking shit they say in the movie, even though the son character is fucking annoying. The way he dies is so satisfying because he dies at the right time before he starts to go into the territory where he starts tanking the quality of the film. So yeah, I love the character dynamics. I like this backstory that we get. It's more police focused in this movie. I think from this movie and the next movie, there's a lot more police involvement where they're trying to figure out if Jason's alive or not. I like that element to the movie, especially given that the first four supposedly take place in pretty much days apart from each other. This kind of gives like a mythology to the Jason character. Like, is he alive? Is he dead? It makes it more enthralling. And I think the story has me more than the average Friday the 13th film in that regard. And honestly, the setting being different from a camp is refreshing itself. It's just like a little backwoods area. It feels similar. But there's no Crystal Lake in this movie. It's just woods and a house for the most part of it. And it surprisingly works. You can tell this movie had a lower budget than Part 4. I guess the quality of actors just weren't there. Supposedly the actors took an audition for a different type of movie that dealt with like possession dreams or something, and then they got like, you know, Ponzi schemed into doing this. But I don't know. It's obviously smaller budget, but I think there's more heart put into this. And I feel like they were at least trying something new and bringing something different to the table. It doesn't feel as basic as the first four movies were. I mean, it does in the sense that it's going back to a whodunit, but I feel like there's a lot more story elements than previous. Now, it drops the ball with Tommy, and it drops the ball with the ending, but I think this movie offers more than the first four previously, and I think it offers more than pretty much the rest of the franchise, minus Part 6, if you ask me. And that's saying a lot. Now, when it comes to the music, I think Manfredini, Harry Manfredini, is that his name? Yeah, I think he did the music for this. It feels more at home with the Friday the 13th gimmick until we get to Part 6, where it starts to get really meta and hokey with the music. But here, it's more classical, and I like the arrangement. I think my personal favorite musical arrangement for the whole series is actually Part 2's arrangement. But this is probably my second close within the first 5 movies of music. It's typical of the series, but it fits. And yeah, it really works. And honestly, the look of the killer, I guess since we're dealing with a horror icon of Jason, I am a massive fan of the blue mask. I love the look of this. I have a custom made one. My brother gave me this. I love the blue stripes. I just love how that sticks out, and you can clearly tell a Part 5 mask from a Part 6, Part 4, Part 3. I mean, you can if you know what you're looking for, but yeah. Love this mask. Love the look. And honestly, let's bring out the elephant in the room. Who the killer ends up being. I'm not going to spoil it, but honestly, I think it makes perfect sense. I think there's enough backstory that the movie drops. It doesn't just throw a killer out there and just makes you just have to accept it. It gives you a reason behind it. Now, there are some holes into why a certain character potentially linked to the killer was in a certain place during a certain event of the film, let's just say it like that. But there is a certain way to look at it if you look at the relationship dynamics being estranged or something. Maybe they kind of got separated in their life or whatnot. Gotta have to look past that for it to make most logical sense, and that's kind of a logical nitpick about it. But I'm not going to deduct anything on it because, in my opinion, it makes enough sense, right? This is a Friday the 13th film. I'm not expecting logic all that much, if I'm being honest. But other than that, I just think this movie, honestly, in my opinion, is one of my favorite slashers of all time. And I think it's because of just how addicting this film is. You would understand where I'm coming from if you've watched this movie before. In the worst case, even if you're a fan of the franchise and you think this is one of the worst films, tell me this is not a rewatchable movie. Tell me you do not skip this. I don't think anybody skips this film when they watch the franchise, unless they're just blind Jason fans and they absolutely hate this movie. Maybe I can understand, but this is such a rewatchable film. The kills are so much fun. The movie doesn't take itself seriously. It's very tongue-in-cheek. It's very sleazy. I think the sleaziness could be where I end the video on. The sleaziness to this movie, I think, just puts it on a different level. And I totally agree with Strange Michael about this film. I think it's one of the best of the franchise. In my opinion, it is the best, but taste is subjective. But that doesn't take anything away from this being one of my favorite slashers as well. And it's not, trust me, it's not because of the sleaziness, but it's just because the sleaziness makes it to where I don't have to critique this so seriously. And it's a film that I can just turn my brain off and enjoy. And I think a lot of the acting performances here are just so lighthearted, and it's a weird combination that normally doesn't really work for me. But this is like how some people view Halloween Ends. For me, I think this is the Halloween Ends I like. You know what I mean? It's just the bastard child of a franchise. It doesn't belong in it. And I don't really feel any regrets starting here with the reviews because it really doesn't belong. But I love it regardless. I love it deeply. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, it's not getting a masterpiece score for me. A 5 out of 5 is something I rarely hand out with films. I usually save that and covet that rating for films I think actually deserve that. But I will give it the next highest up that I'll usually give. And I'll give it like a 4.5 out of 5. Now, this is getting a bias curve for me because I have some nostalgia with it. The first time I saw this movie, I was maybe like 9 years old. I saw it on AMC and I fell in love with it. I saw the censored version of it, of course, but it made me want to go try to track down a DVD. And I had the DVD for years before I upgraded to this Blu-ray. And I watched that to pieces. And I don't know, who the killer ends up being is one of my personal favorite slasher icons because they're so beat up and unloved. I feel like somebody has to love them. And it's just in my personal favorites. I might have to make a top 10 personal favorite slasher movies someday for you all, just so you can get a sense of what movies I love in the genre. I might have some hot takes in there, but yeah, stay tuned for that in the future. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Friday Part 5, A New Beginning. Let me know down in the comment section. Do you love this movie? Do you hate this movie? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.